Hey there, and welcome to a deep dive. Today, we're taking on it's a heavy subject, but incredibly important self reproach, that quiet, often relentless force inside.
Definitely heavy. Yeah.
We've got this one source document guiding us today, and it really digs into what self reproach actually is, what it does to us, and maybe, crucially, how we might find a way towards, freedom from it.
Mm.
So, our mission here is to unpack the ideas in this document, try to get a handle on the mechanics of this self inflicted pain, really, and see what path forward it
That
suggests.
sounds good.
Okay, so right off the bat, the source calls self reproach a silent but destructive force. You know, that inner voice, the one that jumps straight to, this is your fault. Well, this source says that voice goes way beyond just acknowledging you, maybe messed up.
Exactly. Yeah, the
Yeah.
material points out it's not just about actual mistakes where you genuinely erred. It could latch onto suffering or grief or even rejection. It's like, the source puts it as creating an inner courtroom.
An inner courtroom.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're suddenly both the accused and the prosecutor, just hammering away with a guilty verdict.
That's a powerful image. And the source argues this inner condemnation has some pretty serious consequences, right?
Oh, absolutely. This document, it really highlights how this deep judgment, um, it destroys self-worth,
Yeah.
destroys human relationships, and undermines every right to happiness.
Mm.
It's not just like a fleeting guilt. It's a fundamental stance against yourself.
So it shifts from I did something bad to something more like I am bad. Is that the idea?
That's exactly the treacherous shift the source describes. The inner logic just becomes punishing. If you see yourself as fundamentally guilty, you implicitly, well, you deny yourself the right to joy or peace or even just being okay. It's all based on this idea that happiness is something you have to earn.
Yeah.
And, well, your guilt means you just never quite qualify. The rule becomes, I made a mistake, so I'm not allowed to be happy. Simple as that almost.
Wow. That's a brutal internal system to live under. The source calls this mechanism treacherous. Why treacherous? What makes it so, insidious?
Well, it's treacherous, the source explains, because it just keeps going. It feeds itself. You keep punishing yourself even when the situation's long gone. Maybe others have forgiven you, or honestly, maybe there was nothing to forgive in the first place. It's a self-imposed punishment that knows no end, because that inner judge, it never wraps up the case. The sentence just continues indefinitely.
And the document even talks about the extreme end of this, where it stops being something you feel and becomes who you are.
Yes, exactly. At its most extreme, the source suggests self-reproach isn't a feeling anymore. It's your identity. You become the guilty one. The material says you stop really living life, and instead you're just living out of perpetual penance.
Living penance. Oof, that phrase really lands. So, okay, you've got this incredibly heavy internal burden. Where does all that psychic energy go? The source mentions it finding an exit.
Right. This is where the document gets into projection. Basically, what you can't handle or process inside often gets, well, pushed outward. That heavy weight of self-reproach, that constant judgment, you start turning it onto other people.
Mm.
You begin to see your own flaws, your own guilt reflected back at you from the people around you. And this can lead to mistrust, or blaming others, or just pushing them away. The source points out this kind of paradox. It might feel like the world's against you, but actually, the world isn't against the person. It is the person who has turned against themselves.
So projection feels like maybe it's protecting you from the inner pain, but really it just moves the battlefield. Is that it?
That's a good way to put it. The source calls projection a self-protective mechanism, yeah, a bitter form of it. It doesn't fix the inner pain, not at all. It just shifts it, keeps the core wound raw, and ends up damaging your relationships. It kind of pulls other people into an inner war that is not theirs.
Right. And the source also talks about self-reproach not just as a state, but as an active kind of suffering. How does it describe that?
Active, yeah, because it's constantly working with the past. It feeds on memories, endlessly replaying mistakes, chewing over conversations, weighing words and actions from ages ago. The source says this constant churning keeps the wounds open to prove that the suffering is justified. Like, there's this subconscious need to show that the pain is valid, that it serves some purpose.
Which I guess leads straight to that paradox the source mentions, doesn't it? Wanting freedom, but also clinging to the chains.
Exactly. It seems completely irrational from the outside, but the source suggests this self-created suffering comes mostly from how we interpret things, not just the initial event itself. A mistake stops being just an action. Through self-reproach, it becomes who you are. The document is pretty clear. One suffers not because one has done something, but because one has come to believe that one is that. The suffering is locked into that identification.
Okay, and this leads to something fascinating. The source calls the old inner salvation plan That sounds intriguing. What's that about?
Yeah, it is interesting that this document suggests many of us carry this like deep-seated belief system,
Yeah.
often totally unconsciously. The core thought, very deep down, is something like, if only I reproach myself enough, then I'll get better. Then I'll finally be good, then I'll be worthy.
Ah, so it's this hidden hope that punishing yourself will somehow purify you, make you acceptable.
Precisely. We might think, consciously or not, that self-reproach is necessary.
Yeah.
Keeps us on the straight and narrow, stops future mistakes.
Mm.
But the source really challenges that. It argues it functions much more like a torture instrument.
Ouch.
Yeah. Instead of helping us grow, it just traps us in the past, making us relive failure over and over. The material's quite blunt. Self-reproach rarely leads to healing. It leads to repetition, to hardening,
Mm.
and it puts up this conditional barrier to love. Love only becomes available for this imaginary, improved, faultless, worthy I that, let's be honest, doesn't actually exist.
Mm. The source also notes that when this inner criticism gets too much to bear, other strategies start popping up.
Yes, exactly. The document lists several other protective mechanisms.
Hmm.
Things like dissociation, kind of mentally checking out, perfectionism, the intense drive to never mess up again, or constantly trying to please others, seeking that external validation to maybe counteract the internal condemnation, or even sometimes outright rebellion like an external no against that internal guilty verdict.
And the source sees these as protective, fundamentally, not just bad habits.
Well, yeah, they're viewed as strategies, not malicious in themselves, but born out of a need to shield ourselves from this really painful internal conflict. The source points to this gap, right, between the self we think we have to be to deserve love and the self we actually are. These mechanisms, while they might feel protective, they keep alive this illusion that love is a reward you have to earn by being better, which creates, as the source says, a tragic paradox. You desperately crave love, but your own internal rules make you push it away as long as you feel you're not enough.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's quite the bind.
And right at the heart of all this, the source identifies something key: cognitive dissonance.
Cognitive dissonance. Okay, how does that play into self-reproach?
Well, the source explains that this dissonance, this clash, happens because many of us experience love, especially early on, as conditional. Love that felt like it depended on our behavior, how well we did if we obeyed. This teaches the brain. Love is earned, love can be lost.
Right.
But that learned belief often clashes head-on with a deeper, maybe intuitive sense that love should be unconditional, that it just is.
So that tension between love is earned and love should be unconditional creates all this inner noise.
Exactly. The source literally calls it psychological noise, inner pain, doubt, confusion. And it's this internal conflict, this dissonance, that keeps us stuck, keeps us captive in old patterns of self-reproach and living conditionally.
Okay, so given all that, what does the source actually propose as the way out of this cycle? It asks this really crucial question. What happens when you meet that inner pain, that shame, that fear with the words, yet I love myself and accept myself as I am?
Yeah, that's the pivot point. The document describes this as starting a profound correction. It's not just saying nice words. It's presented as a conscious act of mental and emotional reprogramming.
Reprogramming.
You're deliberately interrupting that automatic self-reproach track and actively choosing to respond with mildness instead. And importantly, the source stresses this isn't because you've suddenly decided you are good enough. It's the radical choice to simply stop judging whether you are or not.
So the critical part is the decision itself. You stop holding love hostage to condition.
Precisely. That's the core of it. And the source says once you make that decision, love becomes available again. Not just self-love, though that's huge, but also your capacity for love in relationships. It affects your choices, your reactions to things. Because when you allow yourself to be loved as you are, you also stop needing to put those same conditions onto other people.
That makes sense. But the source does acknowledge that this correction, this move towards accepting yourself unconditionally, it can feel really uncomfortable, even frightening at first. Why would that be?
Well, because, as the document explains, you're essentially challenging those old protective strategies we talked about: projection, perfectionism, people-pleasing, whatever they are for you. Those mechanisms have been your system's way of coping, maybe for decades, often unconsciously.
Yeah.
They were built to protect you from what felt like danger, the danger of rejection, sure, but also the intense pain of the self-reproach itself. The source talks about this pain as the second arrow. The initial event is the first arrow, but the self-inflicted suffering, the judgment, that's the second arrow you shoot at yourself. The correction is about choosing not to fire that second arrow anymore.
Okay, I get that. And so for that old defense system, just living without those conditions feels unsafe.
It feels unknown.
Yeah.
Yeah, unsafe, perhaps. Not because love itself is dangerous, obviously, but because operating outside that rigid structure of conditional worthiness is just unfamiliar territory for those deeply ingrained patterns. The source highlights that doing this takes courage, but not like brute force willpower.
Mhm.
It's described more as a gentle determination.
Gentle determination. I like that.
Yeah. It takes repetition, patience. The document uses this beautiful phrase. It requires giving love to that part of us that is afraid of love.
Giving love to the part that's afraid of it. Wow. And the result, the consequence of this gentle determination of actually letting love back in.
Well, the source describes this as the really powerful outcome. Pure love, it says, when you stop holding it back, it starts to meet needs deep inside you that you might not even have known you had. Needs for safety, peace, clarity, forgiveness, surrender. It fills those internal deficits in ways words often can't. Not because you, force love to happen, but because you simply no longer hold it back.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, the core message from this source, it seems, isn't about trying desperately not to make mistakes anymore.
No, not at all. It really starts by letting go of that deep, often unconscious belief that our mistakes somehow make us unworthy of love. It's about consciously choosing to replace that learned lie of conditional love with the truth that love is actually our birthright. Not something we earn by being perfect, but something inherent just because we exist.
Mm.
That, the source suggests, is where the real healing begins.
Mm.
And the source calls this maybe the most revolutionary act you can do when facing that relentless inner critic. Quote, against all inner voices softly and steadfastly repeating, yet I love myself and accept myself as I am. It's not, letting yourself off the hook for your actions, but it's the beginning of freedom from identifying solely with guilt.
Freedom begins where mildness begins. That's
Finally.
that really sticks. So it's not about ducking responsibility, but it's about this really profound insight that, hey, being human means messing up sometimes.
Yeah.
Guilt is a feeling, it's not who you are. And happiness isn't some prize you win for being perfect, it's a birthright, as the source puts it.
Yeah.
Freeing yourself from those conditions you've placed on your own worthiness, that seems to be what breaks the whole cycle. Self-reproach is, in the end, a reaction to what the source calls a thought error, an illusion that you somehow forfeited your right to be loved because you broke some imaginary rule you learned somewhere. Recognizing that illusion, that's what creates the space for healing.
And the source leaves us with one final, I think, really insightful point. The true opposite of self-reproach. It isn't pride. It's compassion.
Compassion. Wow. For yourself, first and foremost. And then letting that naturally extend outwards. It really does tie everything back to that idea of love as a birthright, doesn't it? That maybe it's that compassion, this gentle acceptance of ourselves and others, flaws and all. Maybe that's the key to a life where mistakes are bearable, relationships feel fairer, and our hearts can actually open up to joy and peace without conditions. Definitely something to think about.